Hey everyone, Pete here again, and today I wanted to do another tutorial. This is going to go over some of the basics of using lists in Forge. Um, Keep in mind I have already done a video that talked about loops and some basics of how loops can be used. And I think I covered some list stuff there as well. Um, Also, custom events is good to know how to use when you're using lists because essentially you build a list, you can use it to store information and then gather it later by maybe, grabbing it by index. But also, what I find most common when I'm using a list is I get a loop through that list and I can have it do things to the objects in that list. Um, an example of that is the Splatter Monkey remake that I made. In order to kind of keep track of who's on what team, because it's a free-for-all based game mode, I had to keep track a list of those players, and I'd add to the list and remove the list, and if I needed to do something for that specific team, I would go through that list for it. Um, so today, what we're going to do, and I figure since these are already on the map, we'll just kind of use some of these. Okay, so we have UNSC 2, 1, 3, 4, and 5. These are not in order, but what I want to do, I'm going to grab all these and let's build a graph and kind of bring them in here. So I'm going to actually put these in order because it'll bug me, but there's a few different ways to use lists. The first one I'm going to show you is just a real basic list. We've got 5 of them, so that'll be perfect. So if we go in here and add a node and we come down to variables basic, object list is right here, okay? And essentially this creates a list, however, it only can take in 4 objects. You just pull your objects over. It's going to always basically be object references. And you can have an empty object reference. So that is possible. Keep in mind with lists some of the basics. So when you're using an object list like this, it's going to order what's in the list from top to bottom. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Those are going to be in order in the list. Let's say I want to make my list bigger. Let's grab another object list, okay? So we basically are going to have to make another list and combine it. Another thing to keep in mind is you can't add the same object. Well, okay, you can add the same object to a list that already has that object. However, it will not add a second version of that into the list. So the list is what it is. If you add a 5 in right now to this list, it's only going to just have the 1 5 at the beginning. Um, Now, these two lists, if we want to combine them, a lot of what you're going to use is in this objects menu. Right here we have at the top, combine object lists, okay? So this is one way we could do it. Now those lists are they're combined, and as far as I understand, and it's been this way for me ever since I've been doing lists, whatever goes into the top button here on a combine will be at the front of the list, and whatever is brought in underneath it will be basically behind it in the list, just like we have it staggered here. Um, okay, so that's one way we could do this to create our list. Another way we could do it, since we only have one object here, we could actually get rid of that, get rid of our combine, and we could use this handy little node called add object to list. So this technically uses one less node, so it may make more sense in your situation, depending on what you're using it for. But see how it outputs a new object list, okay? So this would be the same thing as that other one with the combine, two object lists and combine. Now, if you're adding more than one object to the list at once, it may not make sense to do an add object to list because you could probably just add more to the list. But keep in mind too that if we wanted to use that add object to list, we could do a loop. So let's just say it's in logic here. For each object, okay? We're gonna say we have a loop, and I'm not gonna put together an event quite yet, but so you could say execute per object. Oh, I'm sorry. We need a different node here, and this is what I was gonna get to. So let's actually do something a little different so far. In our variables advanced, you're gonna see that there are nodes in here for object lists. So declare object list variable. Let's do that, okay? Now keep in mind when you're doing a declare, you have to put something into it or you're gonna get your graph won't build. So we're gonna just name this list for simplicity's sake. And our scope, we'll just leave it local because we're just working in this one brain. If we try and run it right now, obviously nothing's connected, but let's imagine that all this stuff was connected. If we try and run it, it's gonna give us a graph error in here because we haven't actually put something into the list. So if you want to declare a list and you want to build it later on, an easy way to do that is just grab a basic variable object list, go like this, and plug it in. It's going to basically say you have an empty list that it starts out with. You can also, in declarations, let's clear that connection. You can technically start out with a list like this. Okay, so if we want, oh, I just moved it to the wrong thing. We could start off with our list with these 4. So we declared it as object list. Then, you know, I'm gonna show you another trick here in a second, but let's make it so we can actually do something. So let's grab an event, which we'll just do a player event, and we'll do on player mark. So and what we'll do is, so this needs a list to go into it, okay? Quick way to get a list is not events players. We need to go to normal players section and get all players. So let's say you have 15 players in the game. We're now feeding this 15 objects because players are objects. Because I'm the only one in this game, it's literally just going to be one person. So before we can leave this over here for now. I'm also going to do another event, which is going to be on crouching. And we need another one of these. So we're going to say when we crouch, we want to go through our actual list, okay? So we declared this list already, but we haven't accessed it in any way. So let's let's grab a get object or object list node. So come back down here to our variables advanced, go down to the get section, object list variable, okay? So what this is going to do is it's going to get whatever we stored in our list declaration. Now, as we update it, our declaration, you know, it initially starts out with these 4, but we can update the list and it will essentially store. I always think of the declaration as if it's where I'm storing something. So we could make this list longer, we could add to it, we could take stuff away from it, and it's just going to be stored there for us. So we just have to name it the same thing to access it. So we named it list. Scope is local. You got to make sure your scope's the same, otherwise it won't work. And we'll plug that in right there. So when we crouch, it's going to go through all of the objects in our list. 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's see, what can we do with this? We will set object position. And we can access each object in the list by doing current object, and we'll put that in. So keep in mind, if you haven't yet seen my loops video, what's going to happen is this is going to happen four times, as I mentioned. 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's going to run this node with the current object. So first time, it's going to run set object position. The object that we're setting is going to be the first object in the list, which is power socket UNSC1. Then it's going to, as soon as that's done, whatever, you know, we could have a whole trail of nodes over here. When that's done, it's going to immediately go on to the second one and set the position and do whatever else we tell it to. Then third and fourth. It'll keep going until it goes through the whole list. Now, we are going to turn isRelative on because we are going to tell it to essentially just move it up into the air. I don't know, we'll say like 10. So we can give it a position by giving it a vector 3. We don't want to move it on the X or Y axis, but we'll do it 10 on the Z axis. So that's going to go upward because it's a positive number on the Z axis. So we plug that in here, okay? So we have whenever we crouch, it's going to move whatever's in this list up 10. So what we're going to do now is we're going to you know what, let's get rid of this for now. I'm going to add a so the way that we add objects to this list that we're storing is actually setting the list. Now, when you set an object list, if you can just you basically just set it to whatever's new. So we have to add something to the list and then set it to that new what that new list is. So it's a little funky doing it like that, but I think you'll get the point. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to duplicate our get object list. So this is going to start us off with the list of 4. And then we're going to add an object to that list, which we'll go back and grab our add object to list because we're just dealing with 1. If we were trying to add 5 objects, then we would want to do our loop and then have this add object on what's being executed each time and essentially add one list to another by looping through objects of one list, adding them to the other. So right here, we're going to do our object list right connected up here, and then we have to connect whatever object we want to add. So I'm going to connect it to our power socket 5. It's left out initially, but we'll add it later by doing our onPlayerMark. So we also need to connect this list into the new value. We're setting a new list, and this needs to be named a list as well. And our scope is local. All right, so now what we have is we have a list that we're starting out with is 4 objects. We're going to be able to crouch, and it's going to raise those 4 objects up by 10. Then what we can do is we can mark and add our 5th object in, and then when we crouch, we'll see that it will go through all 5 of those. So let's go ahead and start with that. So first things first, let's crouch. You see we had 4 of them go up. If I crouch again, it's still just those 4. If I player mark, we've now added the 5th one to the list. If I crouch, now the 5th one, it's there. It's lagging behind, but it's still part of the list. All right, so that's some of the bare basics of lists. Let's talk now about adding what I just kind of mentioned. We're going to add, instead of adding just the fifth, number 5, let's go ahead and add some more to our list. One thing I want to show you that's really cool, and keep in mind you probably only want to do this with objects that are not moving. The reason I say that is if you as you try and move around objects that are in a prefab, it starts to get all wonky. But if we just take these 5 and we create a prefab, okay, we can actually take that prefab into our graph, okay, and we can access it by this special node, which is, I think it was in this one. Come down here, objects in prefab, okay? So we now have 5 of these UNSCs in a prefab right here. We didn't have to go through all the nodes to build out our list. It's just there. And we have a list. The way it's kind of weird. I'm still trying to understand how it orders things in these prefabs, but I know that when I'm doing a list of pointers, it actually will go off of pointer 1 will be first, pointer 2, pointer 3, pointer 4. So something to keep in mind, the list may not always be what you expect it to be when you're doing it this way, but it is easy way to get a whole list of things. Now, what I said we shouldn't do is move objects in that list because it starts getting weird. But let's go ahead and do it anyway, and let's see if it gets weird on us. So on player mark, what we're going to do actually is let's do something a little bit different. Let's add a event, which is we're going to do on gameplay start right here. And we're going to tell it to add our object to the list. So we're still going to we're going to start off with this list, but as soon as the game starts, it's going to add the 5th one to the list. It's starting to get messy in here, but we're just going to move that over. So that's covered. So now our list, as soon as we get to the point where we're playing the game, we're going to have all 5 of the first ones. Now let's take a look at our objects menu. Here's a quick, so you don't necessarily have to iterate through using a loop to add objects to the list. you can actually just combine two lists that you already have. So what I'm going to do is on player mark, we're going to combine our lists. And to do that, we need the first list, which do that list. Second list is going to be our objects in our prefab. And actually this, we probably would be better to do it off this identifier. However, I think with the recent update, they made it so you can't crisscross events. So I'm getting the objects from that list, but I think it's going to give us a problem here in a second. Let's do one more set object list. In the advanced section here. So by combining these, we can actually put the value of the output. Now let's see if this will actually connect. No, it won't. So what the game is doing right now, and this is the season 3 update, it's detecting that this is crossing over to this other event down here, and it doesn't want me to be allowed to connect two events together. So it's giving me grief. So if I clear that, okay, now we can connect this, and then now we can just grab that because that's not part of an event technically. It will let us do that. Set our identifier list, and our scope is local. All right, so we're going to run this. Keep in mind it's going to start off, our list is, this list is going to be these 4, and then as soon as the round starts, it's going to add a 5th to the list object. When we crouch, we're going to move the list objects up by 10, which will be those 5. Then we're going to combine our list, which is going to be these 4, and the other ones we grabbed in the prefab. Keep in mind though, since we're getting these 4, we're technically going outside of the current list. So the number 5 that's over here, that's not going to be part of our end list. So when we crouch later, we're going to see everything but number 5 going up because we combined two lists that didn't include number 5. So let's go ahead and try it. So first things first, we crouch, and it's moving our 5. Okay. Now if I set or a mark, now we should have our two lists combined. But see there, number 5 is right here, and it's not part of it. Pretty cool though that we could just grab all of those into one list. The other thing we can do is, I'll show you this as we end here because I don't want to make this video go too long, but we're going to actually grab a pointer and let's set a boundary on it. Skip this boundary. We'll just do a cylinder. We're going to make the radius insanely big. We'll do the top 10, 11, bottom like 11, 12. All right, so we just did this giant boundary, okay? All of this stuff should technically be in that boundary because I went down and up. That's like everything here. So let's go ahead and add our pointer to the graph. And we're going to go to create an area monitor by grabbing out of our basic variables an area monitor. I don't know why I'm not using the mouse here. I'm using the controller still. And then the last thing we're going to do is in our, I think it's in our objects menu, get objects in area monitor. Okay. So now we're going to have a list of everything that falls within that area monitor, which should be like almost everything on the map right now. I'm going to bring it over here, and we're going to get rid of our prefab one because I just want to show you how this works. Now we're going to combine our list of 4 with our area monitor. So we should actually see like the ground moving up and everything on it moving upward. Let's go ahead and run that. Okay, so first crouch, just those move, which actually those may be outside the area monitor now. But, so number 5 is outside the area monitor. I'm gonna mark, so now we probably have a list of like 50 objects. And let's go ahead and crouch. Oh, everything is moving. It's actually moving me upward as well, because I'm an object within that area monitor. If I crouch a bunch of times, it's kind of like I'm flying a little bit. But keep in mind, every time I go up high enough, oh, also it's only going to work on dynamic objects. I forgot that these aren't dynamic, which is why they didn't move. But all of our all of our other things that were dynamic that were within that area, we added them into the object list. So they weren't inside the area monitor anymore. And this one wasn't in the list, which is why it didn't move. Anyway, that's most of it. And there's one other thing I forgot to talk about. So I want to talk about that really quick. And let's do, so let me talk about a few things in this objects menu, because that's where a lot of the list things are going to be. So you can actually get all spawn points into a list by using this node. That's awesome if you want to change spawn points somehow in a different way. You can also get all spawn points for a team into a list right there, which depending on, like, if you're making a game type, that can come in really handy. I actually used it for the Sanctum map that Karmaplex and I made when we were trying to manipulate the spawning to get someone when they die come out from a special spawn point. We actually selected all those spawn points for that team, deactivated them so that it would force the player to go to the right spawn point. You can get the first set of objects using this node, so you can basically output a list of maybe the first 3 objects in a list. So you just put in a list, put in a count, and it gives you that ability. Let's see here. Get object at index. So this comes in really handy. And it can actually come in really handy in a loop. And I'll show you why here. Well, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go too in depth in it. But let me just describe here. So let's say we have a list that we're trying to match certain objects up with something else, okay? So we have two lists. We could plug in our, like, loop through a list here. So we'll just say a list of 10 things here. And if we want it to match 10 other objects in another list, what we can do is we can say, we can plug current iteration into our index number. And then the object list will be like our second list, okay? And what it'll do is it'll, like, so the first list, whatever's number 1, it's going to go through for iteration number 1. The second list, it's going to grab the object number 1 from that list. So you can kind of match things up, and now you have one object here and another, and then the other object there. And so you can kind of use that in different scripts that you do. This one comes in really handy. Also, another thing is on custom events, because as I mentioned before, custom events are super handy when it comes to loops. You can basically loop through a list, plug that one object that you're on into a custom event, and do essentially that custom event for maybe 30 objects in a row, because you're just, you know, you only have to write the code for the custom event once, but you can loop through like 30 objects. Um, the other thing is if you want to, I just want to show you here on custom event, okay? So sometimes you want to pass two objects into an event, and well, actually, let me show you the trigger one because it's probably easier to see. So, you have your identifier, you pass an object in here, so the event will start. And if you aren't real familiar with the custom events, essentially you plug an object in here and it comes out over here when, when the event's called. Plug a number in, number comes out here. But if you want to plug in two objects or even many objects, you have object list option. And it's super handy if you only need two. You can plug one object in here. You can plug a list, so you could just, pass in a list with one object. Kind of, let me just show you here. I'm going to drag this all the way down, but you could pass in an object list with one object in it. You know there's only one object in it. And then you could use our get object at index and just do index number 1. And so now you've actually passed in two objects, one there, and you can then manipulate those within your event. So pretty handy there. That was the last thing I kind of wanted to mention was get object at index, because it's super helpful. But let me just make sure on the objects menu we didn't miss anything else. Oh, you know what? Get random n objects. So this is actually really handy if you're doing game types. You can basically pull random number from a list. Now, keep in mind, this node is kind of broken. And what I mean by that is it doesn't always output what you expect. Let's say you have a list of 20 objects and you were to say get random 20 objects. In theory, that would randomize that list of 20 and output a randomized list. Well, it doesn't always do that. It's just, I don't know what the bug is that's causing it, but sometimes you'll get like 15 of those 20 that come out. So a trick there is another node that I wanted to mention that I forgot. There's so much information with lists, and I'm sorry that this is going so long, but hopefully you're getting something out of it. You have a couple other nodes that can come in really handy. Get shared objects, get unique objects, okay? So one trick I learned that you can get around the fact that this doesn't always work properly is you take your original list, so we'll just say it's this, okay? And I know I'm getting so messy all over the place, but we have get object list, okay? Let's say we plug that in as our list, and we know that it's 20 objects, and we plug in 20 objects. The new list, let's say it only comes out 15. Well, you're not going to really know that till something's going wrong. But if you were to say get unique objects and plug your original list in, that's going to actually output a list of the other 5 objects that so the 5 objects that this missed, it'll output that, and then you can then combine them. So combine object list. So you could basically combine your outputs of those two, and then worst case scenario, so let's say it doesn't work right, you only get 5 out of your 20, you're going to at least combine the other 15 in the list, and you're going to get a list that has some randomness to it. because it's probably pulling those 5 randomly out of the middle of it. But anyway, there's some things there. Getting shared objects is also super helpful. So if you have 2 lists and you're trying to figure out, is this object from one list in an object of another? So let's say, for example, you're getting objects in an area monitor. Okay, let's say you're trying to check if a certain player's in the area monitor, and then you maybe use the team one where it's get all players on a team. Um, you could then check and see if an object that's in this area monitor is also on that team, and it would output that person. And then you could essentially loop through. Maybe there's 3 people from that team on it. You could loop through that 3 and do something, whatever you wanted to do with it. You can remove an object from a list, which is basically the opposite of adding an object to a list right up here. So you could do the same thing. Plug in this object. You need to plug in a list. So let's clear all here. You could use combination somewhat like this. And you'll just have to imagine that you have an event. But basically, you put the object you want to remove, you put your list up there, and you plug it into your value and set your new list to be the list with that object removed. And so I think that's going to pretty much cover the majority of the basics. I'm sorry it was so messy, but I think there's a lot to know. And if as you're getting into scripting, you kind of open up new horizons as you learn that you can use lists to make things more simple. You can essentially write one custom event to handle 50 objects because you just kind of pass them in through a loop. I'll tell you, on a project I'm working on right now, we have a train that's running along um, pointers, and it's going to the different points on the pointers. Well, we wanted to make sure it was very accurate, so we have 59 pointers that are going in a straight line. And being able to prefab the 59 and then just plug it into our list without having to do this. And you'll see this a lot when you're starting to build lists. To do 59 objects. You know what? Actually, I can just pull in a prefab and show you. It'll be faster. Let me just find the prefab. All right, this one has a long list in it. So, and again, I didn't prefab everything in this list, but this actually handles 48 objects. Okay, so 59 would be even larger than this. Each of these handles 4, but I don't have anything plugged into these to build this list. So that would mean you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, plus the 48 objects. So that's 60 right there. That's 70 nodes just to build a list of 48 objects, which is insane. But if you're able to use maybe objects in an area monitor or objects in a prefab, you can build that list with one node. So it's kind of opens up new horizons, as I mentioned. But I'm going to go ahead and end there because I went way longer than I expected. But feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. I'm going to also do some more videos here soon, tutorials that may incorporate some use of lists to kind of show you how things work. But thanks for watching. If you made it this far, appreciate the support and the I actually love the questions. I love answering those. So if you have a question, drop it in the comments. If you have something you're working on and you want to understand maybe how to do it better, feel free to reach out to me.
If I can't help you, I might just give you an idea of how to go about it. And anyway, hope you guys all have a wonderful day and take care.